Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. If you missed the last segment, I talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their offseason, and how critical some of the decisions that are on the table for them could be if they only hit on one or none of them, and how far they could be set back potentially in a very competitive NFC. That was in the first half of the show. Now I'm able to move on to the comments made by Stephen Jones, the CEO and Vice President of the Dallas Cowboys. He had some interesting things to say recently at the Combine around the culture. A lot has been made about the Cowboys culture. I'm going to get into that, but before I do that, again, I want to remind everyone listening to this show live that if you have any questions during this live show, any comments that you want to make, please use the tip and donations link that is running across the ticker below me. With any of those questions, using that link makes it able for you or for me to read the question out loud live on air and interact with you guys. So if you're unable to see the link listening to this episode, the link to that would be the gsmcspodcast.net. Again, the link is gsmcspodcast.net. It's a big help for this show and all the other shows around the network every time you guys do that. So it's greatly appreciated if you guys have any questions to go ahead and use that link. But going back to the Cowboys and their sort of situation, they've been relatively quiet, which is the ironic part in terms of moves, contract talks, free agency activity. They've really not done anything, but they still are able to make a lot of headlines, stick in the news with a lot of people because, one, they are the Dallas Cowboys, and two, they left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Just the last time they played in the playoffs, obviously that home loss to the Packers was their worst in I forget how many years, but it was if you saw the game, it was really bad. Offensively, defensively, Dak was not the greatest as well. None of their big players showed up in the moment where it mattered most, and that's kind of where this all stems from, because their big players, probably their biggest player, Micah Parsons, has been talking in the media a few weeks ago now, where his last comments where he mentioned, talking about their locker room environment, the trying to be a leader on the team, the comments made by DeMarcus Lawrence, and when he was asked on First Take, why do you believe the Cowboys aren't here? He basically said, honestly, we just kind of got to a point where we got tired. By the time that game came along, he felt that the team was tired. Mike almost basically responded directly to that and said, you can't say that. You could say it privately if you want, but you can't go out in the public and say that. And, he went on to say that the playoffs are meant to rejuvenate you, make you have more energy. You have to be prepared to be in that moment. And he didn't say it to DeMarcus Lawrence directly. He didn't address him directly, but it might as well have been that. And that kind of stirred up some news. And after that, Micah also was still active in social media by saying things like, he was talking to Jerry Jones about the type of guys that he wants to have in the Cowboys locker room that he believes are very beneficial to this program. And he also mentioned the most important part, I thought, was which guys he thought didn't belong there, essentially what he said. All that was brought up, the kind of culture that they were driving with him saying that. A lot of people had negative things to say about it because of, there's this new form of players now. Everyone has their own show, everyone has their own voice, and everyone voices their thoughts. He received a lot of backlash from people saying, this isn't the kind of thing that Cowboys need at this point, and they're all questioning, the kind of leader that he is. If you want to say he's a bad leader, a good leader, that's up to you. But I talked about it on this show before, and I didn't have a problem with it up until, there comes a point where it is a bit too much. Now in the off season, we're at a point where the league year hasn't officially started, and you're still talking about last year. You're even mentioning other quarterbacks compared to Dak, and it just doesn't seem necessary right now. Like, most players just go off on vacation right now, and they're away from everything. and he's still talking in the media. So I think to that point, it's gotten a little bit too much. Like he should just like turn everything off and just get away from it all. And he kind of has done that now, but that kind of was where I stood on it. And now they asked Stephen Jones about it, what he thought about the culture, their leadership within the organization. And, basically he said, I think our leadership on our team is outstanding. When they asked him about it, he added a much longer response, and he said, we feel good about our culture. You always want to be better. I will say that. If your results aren't winning the Super Bowl, I think everybody is saying, how do you ultimately be the last guy standing? But I think overall, between organizationally and between our coach and our personnel depth, I think our leadership on our team is outstanding. And that's the part I wanted to touch on. Like their leadership, their organizationally and coaching and personnel departments. He mentioned everything but the players, and that's where I'm trying to bring this all to. He mentioned everybody around the culture, the organization, the leadership. He mentioned everybody but the players, and I thought, maybe he didn't understand the question. All right, that kind of makes sense, but to not mention the players when you're talking about the culture, the leadership, those are the guys that ultimately said it in the place where it matters most, which is on the field, obviously. In the locker room, you want your players involved in that, the culture setting, who's going to be the leader, which one of those players that you drafted that you thought would fit this team, we're going to step up and be the leaders. And he didn't mention anybody, like a Micah Parsons, a CeeDee Lamb, a Dak, the quarterback. He didn't mention any of those guys when he brought up this topic around, running it all well, their organization being well run. He said outstanding, and almost like they've been to the conference championship the last few years. Yeah, they've made the playoffs, but it just seems like this team's always lacking accountability, or they're always trying to place it somewhere else other than on the players. And I don't see anything wrong with doing it, with placing it on the players. Some people might think it's unfair to put it all on the players, but they're the ones out there actually playing. Jerry Jones gets a lot of media attention. Same with Stephen Jones around his actions, what he does as the general manager and stuff like that. But the players are the ones that actually have to do it and go out there and perform. And there's really no excuse right now because they have this great team, all this talent, and then they just shrink. They disappear in the playoffs. The last few years, the last decades, if you want to say, they haven't been really anywhere. And I think it's gotten to a point now where you have to say something if you're Jerry Jones or Stephen Jones, or at least do something. They always talk about they want to get back there. They want to get back to the winning ways. They mentioned this organization in connection to greatness, championships, but this group of players specifically hasn't done that. They haven't done that in over 20 years, and they haven't really done anything about it. They had the opportunity to when they lost that game to the Packers, and everyone thought the logical thing was to fire Mike McCarthy or change the players up a little bit, and they really didn't do anything. They quite literally haven't done anything since that game. They brought Mike McCarthy back, I guess, is doing something, but it wasn't the right choice in a lot of people's minds. Definitely mine. I thought they were just going to try and reset everything, give Dak another opportunity with a different coach and see if he proves himself even more. Now with a contract on the horizon, it seems for him, he's expected to make a lot of money. $60 million is what's been rumored. If he's worth that, I don't know. That's very subjective. I personally wouldn't pay him that, but the Cowboys, are they ready, or are they in a moment where they could just not pay him and try and look for another option? Can you really find something better than Dak right away in the next year? Most likely not. So they're almost between a rock and a hard place right now, where are they, with the talent that they have, are they willing to kind of take a huge step back without a quarterback, potentially without a head coach and Mike McCarthy, and restart it all with a great team, but just they need a quarterback? It's a lot easier said than done to find that franchise guy. And that's where they are heading towards down the road. But right now, this season is so crucial for them because they're always held to the highest of standards. There's no new players there that hold a lot of pressure that you can say, oh, they're only their first or second year, cut them some slack. Micah's been there for a good amount of years. CeeDee Lamb's been there for a good amount of years. Dak Prescott has been there for a long time. DeMarcus Lawrence has been there for a long time. They got other veterans. Stephon Gilmore is synonymous with championships, and he gets to the Cowboys. He does contribute, but he's also another veteran that hasn't really shown up for them. Trayvon Diggs, all right, he was hurt. He couldn't play this year, but he was part of a disaster last year before this past season just ended. Before that, he was on that team playing where they got eliminated. So there's nobody young that you could bail out by saying, oh, this is only their first couple years in the NFL. They have more time. All of these guys have been there long enough to know what the Cowboys should mean, but they have to produce it. And I think it's hard for them to produce it if they don't see any consequences being done by or handed down by Stephen Jones or Jerry Jones. If they just keep producing the same thing, not changing anything, how are they expecting to get back there? Just really based on hope, just hoping that you get back there just because you're the Cowboys and you think you deserve to be in those games. That hasn't been the case for a long time. And I just found it very, very odd that he would speak so positively around the culture and everything. Yeah, maybe he's supposed to say that, but I would love to see some more accountability, consequences from the organization on some of these players, because something needs to change for the Cowboys for them to get back to where they believe, and a lot of people in the league believe that they should be in these big games because of how big the Cowboys are nationally and worldwide. They're very recognized, and they need to be in those games for the NFL to gain to have that notoriety that they need around the world. But that's where that stands. The Cowboys, it's a work in progress with the Cowboys. But I'm going to move on to the last topic after the break coming up. Finally, what are my thoughts on what Mecole Hardman said on the New York Jets on the Pivot podcast? He didn't pull any punches. He let it all out there, potentially getting himself in trouble as well. Find out more on that after this break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.